Did Penn State really fire James Franklin to hire either Josh Heupel or Kalani Sitake?
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football and this never-ending coaching search. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm your host of Locked On Nittany Lions. As always, your daily source for all things Penn State sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcasting network out there. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. In today's episode, we're going to talk about hindsight being 2020. Will Penn State regret firing James Franklin, or did they not have a choice? We'll circle back to this conversation. I want to talk about now Josh Heupel and Kalani Sitake, but also the potential candidates that are out there that still can actually elevate Penn State. And I'm kind of confused why Penn State isn't going with any of them. But no news is bad news for Penn State at this point in time. It means that Penn State is being told no by their preferred candidates. Okay, so Kalen DeBoer. That's not a secret that Penn State's interested in Kalen DeBoer. But then the mystery candidate. Okay, so this was the secret coaching candidate. Lincoln Riley of USC was allegedly that mystery candidate. And it makes sense for Penn State to target both Kalen DeBoer and or Lincoln Riley, because if the rumors are flying that they're not happy, it's not working out at their other institution, maybe that's an agent play to try to get them more money, more resources, guarantees. I'm not sure, because both of their contracts are pretty beneficial if you ask me. But Penn State was swinging for the home runs. Pat Kraft, I've said this, and this is accurate, you don't fire James Franklin lightly. You don't make that move lightly. So I can't fault Penn State for trying, but what I can fault them for is not delivering at this point. And now you're here with Kalani Sitake and Josh Heupel as the supposed leading candidates. Again, I want to talk about a few of the other upside candidates that are actually still available that Penn State could get that I would prefer over Kalani Sitake and Josh Heupel, because I don't know what they give you that elevates you above what James Franklin was. And that is what I have said consistently in this coaching search. It's no disrespect to Kalani Sitake. It is no disrespect to Josh Heupel for who they are as coaches. But what do they give you that James Franklin, collectively, overall, that James Franklin couldn't give you? Again, you don't fire James Franklin unless you had the intention of elevating this program. As Pat Kraft said, we want to reach national titles. Well, you did figure out that James Franklin was most likely not going to get you to that point. Does Josh Heupel do that? Does Kalani Sitake do that? And as individual coaches, they are good coaches, but at Penn State, can they do that? Because Josh Heupel, currently at Tennessee, so far so good, right? But kind of does struggle in a little bit of the big games. And okay, hey, Josh Heupel, he develops quarterbacks really well. Okay, that's something that James Franklin didn't have. And the offenses are really talented. He's able to scheme up offenses very effectively. Hey, that'd be nice, because Penn State hasn't been able to have that kind of juggernaut of an offense for feels like quite some time. Andy Kotelnicki's offense was good last year, right? That was a top 15 group. But still, I'm talking about a high-flying offense that can score at will, not since Joe Moorhead. And frankly, honestly, even Ricky Ronnie. I think Ricky Ronnie deserves the due credit there. So how does Heupel elevate you when he doesn't have any recruiting ties or any personal ties to the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic, Penn State? Right? Nothing connects him to the university. So you're hiring a coach for the sake of hiring a coach. Same thing with now this one. Kalani Sitake is definitely one that I was not expecting. And maybe that's also the other alleged mystery candidate here. I said this to somebody over text message today. that Kalani Sitake is basically their version of Terry Smith because he bleeds BYU. He is BYU through and through. He's an alum. He played. He's been a coach there forever. I guess if there was any interest in him being another prospective coaching candidate elsewhere, he would have left. So if Josh Heupel doesn't fit for Penn State because of geographical concerns, then Kalani Sitake really doesn't fit with what Penn State wants to do. And that's where it seems like things are trending. At least that's the smoke. Is this just another smoke screen, right? Because again, I go back to the phrase, oh, well, no news is good news, right? No news is bad news at this point because other schools are making their hires. And Penn State is the only major superpower, supposedly in college football, without a head coach at this point in time. I'm not concerned about the class of 2026. I know that's crazy to say, but you have the transfer portal. So the class of 2026, as much as I would like to have prospects in the class of 2026, you just go get those players in the transfer portal for the short term. That's where the transfer portal is helpful because you can still build and fill out a roster. You lose a recruiting class, you just focus on the next one. Okay? I'm not saying you don't recruit, but in the scheme of things here, Penn State knew what it was doing. They were going to have to make some sacrifices with this. I didn't think that it was going to get to maybe necessarily this point. And then back to Sitake. Okay, Sitake, since he's BYU all the way to Penn State, I can see why he's interested in the Penn State job because allegedly he's making $3 million. So Pat Kraft can make it worth his while for his staff and for Sitake. And then what players is he going to bring from BYU? Because that's another thing. Okay, well, BYU is a long way from Penn State, right? Utah. And some of those players, I won't speak for the entire roster, but there is a faith element that draws people to Brigham Young University. I don't think I need to go into detail with that too much, but people are there at BYU for more than just football. So this isn't simply a transactional football situation. That's why it's so complicated. It's not as good as Sitake is as a coach and as a leader of men, which I have talked about because Terry Smith said it. And I think that is valuable in this day and age of college football. But the Sitake making this move to Penn State would be the antithesis of just that. Because he's at BYU because he loves the university and he likes building it up, and that's his home. And then you're just going to scrap all of that and fly across the country to Penn State? I'm not sure how that ultimately works at the end of the day. I see both of those situations with Heupel and Sitake eventually getting you the same net result of good or great, but not elite. Still falling to the likes of Ohio State or whatever powers that be in a given cycle, because USC is trending in that direction of being in that tier. I would say next year's probably the year for USC. I'll call that now, which is why it was surprising that Lincoln Riley was the mystery candidate. Things are at least trending in the right direction. And then you have Oregon looming, as always. Michigan, are they going to vault back up and be an elite team, right? It's always going to be Ohio State and then some cluster of a couple other two teams at the top of the Big Ten that's going to cycle. Penn State would like to be at least in that cycle, right? And not always be the doormat for Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon now, whomever. Those coaching hires, I'm not sure, elevate you. They're good coaches, but again, do they elevate Penn State? At the end of the day, probably not. Most likely not. The ones that do, that are still out there, they're actually available. And some people aren't going to agree with all of them, but it is honest. It is the right answer to say that these candidates can elevate Penn State because they have upside. They have potential, even though the floor is also really low as well. We're going to talk about them next here on this episode of Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by Gametime. The World Cup is coming back to North America for the first time since 1994. And with 48 teams for the first time ever, it is going to be massive. But let's be honest, getting tickets is usually the most difficult part. That's why the Gametime app is clutch. finally giving fans a real advantage when it comes to snagging seats. With Gametime, you can track price drops in real time, get alerts when great seats open up, and buy tickets the moment they hit the app. It puts the power back in your hands and makes going to the World Cup realistic instead of impossible. You pull up the app and the layout makes it so simple to scroll through matchups and compare seat views. Pick a game, tap a section, and you'll have your tickets locked within minutes. No confusion, no hunting for the fine print. And the seat view feature, that's a game changer. You literally see what your point of view will look like from that exact seat before you go to buy. Take the guesswork out of buying World Cup tickets and every match, concert, or event with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app, make an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Gametime. All right, let's talk about the other candidates that have potential, and then later on we're going to get to Penn State. Just are they going to regret firing James Franklin? I'll tell you what, they really didn't have a choice. We'll get to that later. The candidates that Penn State would actually be better in the long term with, again, in theory, it's not a guarantee, but these candidates offer you the most upside. Brian Hartline, we're back here. Brian Daboll, yes, he can elevate you. And Bob Chesney. And I find it interesting that Bob Chesney, UCLA, they have their guy allegedly, right? The UCLA circles are saying that Bob Chesney, that we got our guy, we got him. Why isn't he signed? Where's the announcement? Where's the news? Everybody else signed their head coaching candidate, right? But Bob Chesney, is he strategically waiting for Penn State to not get any of these deals done? That's what I've been told. That's the impression that I'm under. So I think Bob Chesney is still holding out hope that he doesn't have to fly across the country to coach at UCLA, and he could actually get the Penn State job. Let me talk about Brian Hartline, because Brian Hartline, and I'm not here to say this is likely, this is realistic. I'm here to tell you about the candidates that actually make Penn State better. Brian Hartline makes you better. He gives you elements of leading a football program that James Franklin just did not have towards the end of his tenure here. The development of players, the recruiting ability, the NFL connections. I know he's an Ohio State guy. The floor for Brian Hartline, in my opinion, is that he'll leave for Ohio State eventually. That's the floor. That's the concern. Is that if Brian Hartline is going to be your head coach, you always have to worry about Ryan Day if he's ever entertained by the NFL. I mean, Ohio State, I think if you're going to succeed there, it's honestly kind of as good as it gets at this point. And I hate saying that as the Penn State podcast host, but I'm trying to be honest, right? I'm sharing my thoughts with you, and I can't help but ignore the fact that Ohio State's just always going to be in the top three year in and year out. You have all the money you could ever ask for NIL, for coaching staff purposes. Why would you leave if you're Ryan Day? So, okay, if he retires, if he says, you know what, I'm good after 5-6 years down the road, because we don't know what that's going to look like. Brian Hartline's probably getting the first phone call. Is he going to leave Penn State to go back to his alma mater? Probably, most likely. But that is a name that gives you the most synergy to actually move up and contend with the powers that be. That's the hire where if you fire James Franklin, it is justified because of the upside. I know the floor is low since he's a first-time head coach and hasn't been a play caller for that long, but his connections, the ability to develop players in an elite way, right? The track record speaks for itself. It's going to just by proxy, well, they're not going to get the next Jeremiah Smith. They're not going to get all these five-star wide receivers. Penn State hasn't had that kind of caliber of wide receiver that's even a tier or two below in recent memory here. Brian Hartline, okay, so you don't get the next version of Jeremiah Smith in 27, 28, 29, but you get the guy after him. You get the guy after that, in theory, right? So Brian Hartline and Penn State would be able to have the resources to help him out in NIL. And I always say this about any coaching candidate. Well, Brian Hartline, he's inexperienced. You hire the people around him to help out. You already have Jim Knowles. You can go get, if he doesn't want Andy Kotelnicki, you can go get a different offensive coordinator. He has the NFL connections to where he can get some pretty high caliber assistant coaches and build out a staff. Let him do what he does well. Focus on the recruiting, focus on the talent development, deviate the play calling a little bit. And you can actually elevate Penn State because he gives you something that Penn State hasn't had. Brian Daboll, yes, would do that. And I know it's crazy. Well, he just got fired by the Giants. He wasn't successful there. That's the New York Giants. Not a lot of coaches are successful year in and year out with the New York Giants. Okay. They haven't been a serious Super Bowl contender in quite some time. If you haven't noticed, since Tom Coughlin in the late 2000s, early 2010s, it's been a while. So Brian Daboll, I think that was a situational issue because he was one of the hottest coaching candidates when he was helping develop Josh Allen with the Buffalo Bills, and that offense was almost unstoppable. But now because the New York Giants are what they are, Brian Daboll's no longer that great of a hire. It's again, his floor would be low because I understand the baggage that he brings, but he has the Northeast connections. He would be able to recruit because you've shown, hey, the resume speaks for itself. I helped develop Josh Allen. I can help you be a future quarterback in the NFL. So the recruiting will take care of itself. It's kind of like Bill Belichick at North Carolina. Bill Belichick doesn't recruit, but I know I'm comparing a multiple Super Bowl champion winning coach, multiple Super Bowl winning coach versus Brian Daboll here, but I'm talking about the NFL experience. That you get somebody that has shown that he can develop quarterbacks. I mean, Jackson Dart was at least on the right track, right? You have the proof with Josh Allen. He's a really good offensive mind. Maybe college would actually be good for him because think of some of the other NFL castoffs that have found success in the NFL, have found success in college football. Lane Kiffin, Pete Carroll once upon a time, Nick Saban. It's not out of the realm of possibility that Daboll would actually be a good hire for Penn State and would actually be able to elevate him. Oh, well, he can't recruit. He doesn't know how to deal with NIL. Go get the people who do. You can hire the staff members who do. Build the recruiting staff, bring in your connections from the NFL and start pushing Penn State as this is a place where you can develop and be an NFL prospect at the next level. And I think something that's undervalued is he has an actual appreciation for the university since he is a Penn State dad. No, he is the father of Penn State students. So Brian Daboll actually does make sense for Penn State. And I've been consistent about that. I know there's the concerns. I know there's the baggage, but he would be a coach that has the potential to elevate Penn State. Bob Chesney is that other candidate. I know he doesn't have the Power 4 coaching experience. Everywhere he's won, he has had success. Everywhere he's been, he's had success. Major success. He turned around Holy Cross at Division II. He kept James Madison going. Hey, but Kurt Cignetti built that program up. Yeah, but he also took a lot of what built that program up with him to Indiana. Bob Chesney, in theory, could do the same thing with James Madison. James Madison players would follow over, so you don't have this complete lackluster roster. The concern is, can he manage a major program? Can he manage a big-time program? With Bob Chesney, you would have to wait that one out because I would like to see some quick results with Brian Hartline and Brian Daboll because they have more proof, so to speak. Bob Chesney, though, since he hasn't coached, I mean, at least Brian Hartline's coached at Ohio State. He knows what the standard is. Bob Chesney, I think that would take time where years 3 and 4, that's where I'd want to see kind of some positive momentum. I'm okay with sacrificing a couple of seasons where, okay, I see the vision, right? Give him some time to settle in, but he's proven that he can do more with less. He has the connections in the DMV because he's been at Virginia and James Madison. He's from Pennsylvania. He's from Coltmont. He's from Coal Belt, Pennsylvania. This guy is as blue collar as it gets. He would be a fit for Penn State. And I would take these candidates over Kalani Sitake and Josh Heupel because they fit Penn State better. Those guys are still good coaches, but they fit Penn State. But these guys fit Penn State better, and they offer more upside. Now, will Penn State regret this at the end of the day? Well, hindsight's 2020, right? James Franklin's having fun at Virginia Tech. Penn State has no idea who its coach is. We'll talk about that coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. This episode is brought to you by Omaha Steaks. The holidays always feel a little easier when you already know the perfect gift, and Omaha Steaks makes it almost too simple. Whether you're treating yourself this season or you want to send something memorable to family and friends, Omaha Steaks delivers handcrafted perfection right to your door. And this week is the best time to jump in because their cyber sale is here, and the deals, they are huge. I've been given an Omaha Steaks gift box myself, and I'll tell you what, that's always one of my favorite gifts to receive every holiday season. The quality is exactly what you're hoping for. Incredibly tender steaks, rich flavor, and meals that make hosting or weeknight cooking easier. And the variety is underrated. Steaks, burgers, comfort meals, sides, desserts. It's one of those gifts that truly fits anyone. And honestly, it's the kind of gift that brings people together because you can share a meal. Save big on unforgettable gifts with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com for 50% off site-wide and an extra 20% off select favorites during their cyber sale. And for an additional $35 off, use promo code COLLEGE at checkout. That's omahasteaks.com. Promo code COLLEGE. Terms apply. See site for details. Hindsight's always 2020. James Franklin, all the intel. He's winning in recruiting. Let's dissect this because to each their own. Because he was doing the same thing at Penn State. He was winning some recruiting battles, but not the ones that you would like him to or expect him to. Okay, so for Virginia Tech, when I see Virginia Tech accounts post about, oh, they're winning this recruiting battle and they're getting this prospect and all of that, James Franklin was doing that at Penn State too, but Virginia Tech was so far down the ACC that anything that's a step up looks better to them. So don't compare Penn State to Virginia Tech right now. That's kind of number one in this instance. James Franklin is going to succeed because the expectations at Virginia Tech, the bar is really low right now. And Penn State doesn't want to be down there. That's why they fired James Franklin. Will Penn State regret this at the end of the day? It is the question. Initially, it's going to feel that way. I'll be honest, because of that point. Virginia Tech is probably going to be content with being 8-4, 9-3, 10-2. They might get to an ACC title. 7-5 Duke is in the ACC championship, folks. So yes, Virginia Tech, by comparison, will look like they're more successful because they're going to hit more of their easier goals. Whereas Penn State is trying to go after national titles and be in the college football playoff consistently and defeat Ohio State at least sometimes. These are kind of like the coaching hire, swinging for the fence in college football. Personify, right? For Penn State, these actual football goals. So Penn State has more of an uphill battle here. But I also want to point this out about James Franklin and Penn State. That relationship was not mendable. I think James Franklin is happier, is better off. It wasn't working anymore between both sides. James looked defeated. He looked like he didn't want to be there. The energy, the emotion that he had beforehand all disappeared, and now it's back with Virginia Tech. There's optimism, there's synergy, whatever you want. Some people just need a fresh start. So I don't think Pat Kraft had a choice because it looked like James Franklin didn't want to be there. The fans, at least the vocal ones, didn't want him to be there. The fans either took two sides. It was the ones that wanted him out, wanted him gone, or the people that just said, I don't know that I can defend him anymore. And as a podcast host, that's the point that I got to. It's like, you maxed out. What more do you need? to get to that next level, because you tell us you need more. I need this defensive coordinator. I need this budget. I need the training table. I need the dormitories. I need this. You got everything you asked for. And now it's your time to prove it. And you couldn't do it. And then to add insult to injury here, I know it's against Nebraska, Michigan State, and Rutgers, but Terry Smith was able to rally this group that had nothing to play for. They weren't doing any of this when it was Nevada, FIU, and Villanova. Pat Kraft and Penn State had no choice but to fire James Franklin because the situation wasn't going to get better. It wasn't going to change. It was either going to be more of the same or less from here on out. And you knew that. You knew that was going to be the case. And I just don't think Franklin wanted to be there at the end of the day. So is Penn State going to regret this? No, because they would have been stuck in neutral for even longer. At least you have the potential, the possibility, the upside to shoot for the stars, to go further than James Franklin could have taken you. Well, you should be content with 10-2 and winning the games that you're supposed to. I can understand that. But when you know how the movie ends every single time, it's a boring movie. And when there's friction, the fans booed him in and out of the stadium against Northwestern. Pat Kraft had no choice. He had to fire James Franklin because the fans that were showing up didn't want him. The players, the coaches, I'm not saying they didn't want James Franklin, but was anybody fighting for him? It didn't look like that. I saw a group of players and coaches that were fighting for Terry Smith. I didn't see personnel fighting for James Franklin on the football field. They lost to Oregon. They didn't need to let one loss turn into 2 and then 3 against mediocre teams, against bad teams. UCLA was bad. Northwestern is at least respectable. They're scrappy. But it's not like you lost to Oregon, Ohio State, and Indiana back to back to back. You lost to Oregon, UCLA, and Northwestern consecutively. And the fans were vocal. I imagine if the fans were all collectively vocal like that, the donors aren't going to boo. But I got to imagine, I have a hunch that the powers that be, at least some of them, were not content with how this went because of all the money that's being poured into a stadium renovation that went into this roster. And you have that result. The expectations were national title, at least college football playoff, at least defeating Oregon or Ohio State in Indiana. Didn't happen. I know we didn't get to that point with James Franklin, but you should at least win against Oregon in the whiteout game. The deck is stacked in your favor. You didn't. You couldn't. Because James Franklin can't. He couldn't at Penn State. And so Pat Kraft had no choice. When there wasn't a vote of confidence from anybody, the fans, most likely the donors, and then again, actions speak for themselves. The players and coaches weren't fighting as much as they could in those games that were definitely winnable. That is why we're here. So for the people that say that Penn State will regret this, Pat Kraft was left with no choice. It was either fire James Franklin and try to start fresh, or your job is attached to his. So if James Franklin continues to give you the same result or even worse, your job's attached to his, so you're going to go down with him. Because if you won't fire him, then the board of trustees will get together and fire you both. So that's why Penn State made this decision. For anybody to say that Penn State, that's why Pat Kraft in particular had to make this decision, because his job was probably on the line if it wasn't James Franklin's job on the line. We'll see how it all turns out. I think Virginia Tech will be better because of it. I'm hoping Penn State will be better because of it. But again, no news is bad news at this point. We'll see how it all unfolds. My name is Zach Seyko. I'm the host of Locked On Nittany Lions. As always, thank you so much for joining me on this show. Greatly appreciate the support. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams daily here on Locked On Nittany Lions, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcasting network out there.